Mike, I am occasionally criticized by trying to find God through intellectual means, philosophical, metaphysical, analytical, and that God is only found through faith and belief and hope and experience. I'm not denying that world of thinking,
Sure.
but I am asking the hard question: can metaphysics discern God? Or is metaphysics just a play toy for those of us who really haven't grown up?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, metaphysics does get us, I think, closer to what God is like. But it reminds me of a really interesting feature of Descartes' Meditations, when you ask me that question. You'll see in the Meditations the famous work of Descartes, wherein he proves that God exists and that the mind is not identical to the body, not just one, but both. And he says he describes God's nature at various points. And one thing that's really interesting about the way Descartes does that is he always trails off. He'll say, well, God is like this, and that sort of thing. Doesn't do justice to Descartes, but that like indicating to you, I've got a glimpse of what this being's like. Okay, we can get an idea, but don't read the Meditations like I've got the whole picture. And I don't think anyone thinks metaphysics is going to do that. It's going to, rise to the heights of giving you the full picture of what God is like. I think it should be a little humbler discipline. And I think it is when it's practiced the right way. You say, look, there's things we can know. We can get some picture of what God is like, but not the full picture. So that kind of cuts both ways, right?
Right. So what are some examples of that? I mean, what are some metaphysical techniques that can give insight into different aspects of God?
Yeah, I think various things can do it. You receive this concept of God as having certain kinds of features, right? So you think, well, one of the things God has is omnipotence. And I think what metaphysicians can do is, focusing on this attribute of God, clarify it, make it clearer to what are the implications, what are the logical relations between being omnipotent and being omniscient, for example, just tracing it out. And once the metaphysician starts doing that, starts seeing the larger relations that have to hold, given this view about what God is like, you can come to some conclusions like, here's the received view of what he's like. Here's why he can't be that way. Right?
So the classic, why can't God make a rock that he is too heavy for him to lift? For example,
it's a clever kind of question to ask. You think, wow, that does illuminate the notion of omnipotence in one way or another. So as the metaphysicians put these questions to one another and trace them out, you discover what these attributes would be like. Again, always though thinking, we're just trying to get an idea of what it would be like to have this kind of power. Maybe it's much grander, as some metaphysicians say. Maybe omnipotence is much greater than what I think it is. Maybe God makes the logical truths and can unmake them. Maybe that turns out to be true. But we can what metaphysicians can do is say, here's one view you haven't considered, right? Omnipotence involves all this stuff, or sovereignty does, or whatever. You think, well, compare that to mine, and now let's trace out what the implications of your view are and what the implications of my view are, and get to kind of the more reasonable view. And that's the most you can hope for, right? Especially in metaphysics. I mean, you really have to be modest in metaphysics, because there are so many views and there are so many really good people working in the area, doing the best they can, disagreeing. So you think, well, I'm not so sure this is the correct view.
Yeah, many scientists would say that there's been no real progress. People disagree all the time. Shows that it is an intellectual exercise, but it's really medieval in character, and basically should be banned.
I think it's not true that there's no progress has been made, but Tim Williamson once said, a great Oxford philosopher, why is it difficult to make progress in these areas? That's a curious question. Because the problems are hard. That's why. They're really, really hard problems, and that's why our progress is slower. We make some, but it's more slowly. And so, compare the problems. We're dealing with a much more difficult problem, and say with the nature of God. I mean, come on, what more difficult problem could there be? We don't get to inspect God, right? So you have to move from certain conceptual moves to certain other metaphysical moves to learn something about it. Although I agree with you, the amount of disagreement, in a sense, is discouraging.
But if you look over 1,000 or 2,000 years in terms of metaphysical thinking, in terms of God, have our understandings been more clarified?
I definitely. I think they have. I think, just to go to omniscience. They used to say things like God knows everything, and there are all kinds of ways in which that can't be true, right? He can't know vague it looks like he can't know vague propositions which are neither true nor false. But there was no discussion of vague propositions back then. So we've got this new kind of way of understanding, expanding the notion of what omniscience is, and we know a lot more about it, right? God doesn't know the set of all true propositions. Why? Because there isn't one. That's why. And we didn't know that back then either, right? So I'm calling this progress. So this is progress in these ways as we understand other fields, other areas in philosophy. You learn more about the nature of what God is like. Yeah. So I'd say, yeah, there is progress. Not a great deal, but there's some.